What do we find at the intersection of faith and the world? Our new podcast, Crossroads, explores this question in thought-provoking conversations featuring guests from around the world who are seeking to live faithfully in the public square. This is a safe space to discuss politics, technology, and our responsibilities as citizens. Pull up a chair and meet us as we search for a better way forward. Welcome to Crossroads, where we discuss the intersection of sacred and civic. I'm your host, Nygard Owens. On today's episode, we're delighted to welcome Rosie Rios, who served as the 43rd Treasurer of the United States under President Obama. She was appointed by President Joe Biden as chair of America 250, the United States Congressional Commission planning the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. Rosie is joining me in Washington, D.C. on one of her visits here, and we're thrilled she had time to chat with us. Welcome, Rosie.
Thank you, Joe.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. Well, let's dive right in. And I am so in awe of you and all you have done and where you have come from. Our lives are the sums of individual moments, circumstances, and choices, and the trajectory of your life is so unique and inspiring. Will you share some of those key moments with us and choices that you've made that have made you who you are?
Well, thank you again for inviting me. I love this cathedral. It's definitely where I bring visitors when they come to D.C. This is one of their favorite spots. My mom was a regular visitor, and so this was definitely on her list of favorite locations. So thank you for having me back here. You know, you're going to always hear me talk about my mom, and I would say that every time that I think about whatever seminal moments I had, it's always with her and because of her. And I would say the other big inspiration for me that still keeps me going is my daughter. And so when I think about those moments of connecting with my past and really think about that as a way to kind of think about the future, those are the two people that really continue to just inspire me every day. So I would say, you know, look, my parents came from Mexico to the United States in 1958. And I want to start really by thinking about the bicentennial, my memories of the bicentennial in 1976. So I was turning 11 years old at the time and thinking about my parents' journey. They came to the United States because my dad was a seasonal migrant worker at the Hunt's Tomato Factory in Hayward, California. And so that's where they decided to land, if you will, and raise their family. And so at one point, my mom left my dad. He was abusive. So she ended up raising all 9 of us as a single parent. Somehow, thankfully, by the grace of God, in our Catholic village, we all went to 12 years of Catholic school, and she sent all 9 of us off to college. So that alone, when you think about that, that is the American dream. But I do remember clearly on July 4th, 1976, it was a cloudy night, but those fireworks were never brighter. But I remember feeling at that time this freedom that I had the whole world in front of me, this freedom that I felt like anything was possible. And I was in 5th grade, I think, at the time. And so really just being very optimistic about the future and very patriotic, kind of a love of country that I still feel today. So when I think about that moment in my life and I think about today, it is such a privilege to think that as someone who is able to remember that day and that whole period of my life very clearly, that is coming full circle to this moment today. But definitely that feeling of hope, gratitude, patriotism is what I want my kids to feel. And so people ask me all the time, how do you know you're going to be successful in 2026? My answer is the same. I want as many Americans as possible to feel like this is the land of opportunity all over again.
Mm-hmm. And you have history with groundswell and getting people involved on the local level to do something at the national level. And you can turn those gifts to America 250 and getting people's enthusiasm built. That's so exciting.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're referring to my time in Treasury or maybe
yes.
So a couple of ironic historical data points for me. So first of all, I was actually Harvard's student representative for their 350th anniversary in 1986. So kind of, again, ironic that, first of all, that Harvard is that much older than our country in terms of our democracy. But the fact that I was a student lead then, it's not on my resume, right? So it's not like people would have known that I was a student lead for Harvard's 350th anniversary in 1986. But here I am for the 250th, right? Very ironic. And at the same time, yes, I think for me, I don't go into something intending to change it. But yes, there have been moments in my career, and certainly I use my time in Treasury as one of them, that was very enlightening for me. So I was part of the Treasury Federal Reserve transition team at the height of the financial crisis in the fall of 2008. I was one of about 24 finance professionals who were brought in at that time to implement the legislation that Congress had just passed to put the economy back on track. So the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, what became known as the Troubled Asset Relief Program. So it was during that period, if you can remember that time frame, it was very stressful. It was a very scary time in our economic history. The house was on fire, that was for sure. And so during that time in Treasury, it was under Secretary Paulson and President Bush, and this was right after the election, obviously November, when President Obama won the election. We were working towards this transition, if you will, during that fall period. And then when President Obama took office in January of 2009, it was intended to be, again, that smooth transition of the implementation of this legislation. And it was very stressful. And I remember in Treasury taking my breaks in Treasury's Historical Resource Center. And it was in Treasury's Historical Resource Center, which is not open to the public, that I really came across what I would call a lot of buried treasure, if you will. And so people wouldn't know that Treasury just didn't produce currency. They actually produced all the financial products of the federal government. So it's one of the first things that George Washington did when he became president in 1789 is he appointed Alexander Hamilton, and the Treasury was really one of the first things that was set up. And so in this Historical Resource Center, they had everything that was all the archived items that were produced. So it included everything from postage stamps to food stamps to military payment certificates to savings bonds, any type of notes. And so that artistry, those renderings, those concepts were all in there. And I just found it to be such a great release of stress. But it was also just kind of plunging through those items, just really looking through our history with this artist concept, right? And after a while, I saw a pattern. I noticed that every image that I came across of a woman was not a real woman. They were allegorical figures, sometimes clothed and sometimes not clothed, like Lady Liberty types. But every image that I came across of a man was a real man, a founding father, a cabinet member, a president. And then I started looking a little deeper, and I looked at the history of our currency, and it dawned on me that we as a country have never had the portrait of a woman on our Federal Reserve notes in the history of our country. And it was very shocking for me. This was December of 2008. And then when I did a little bit more digging, I realized that at that time, there were almost 30 countries who had women on their modern day currency, and we certainly weren't one of them. So I made that decision then and there that I was going to work on that. And so of the 24 or so folks on the transition team, about half a dozen of us were recommended for a permanent appointment, and I was one of them. And I chose Treasury of the United States for many reasons. One, I thought if I could cobble together the right portfolio, I could focus on this project of overseeing coining currency, and that included the design concept. And two, as you do a little bit more due diligence, understanding the process of what it would take to get there and the authority that I needed to make those recommendations. And so I was nominated by the president in May of 2009, confirmed by the Senate in July of 2009. And it was a big decision to make. My daughter at the time, during the transition team, my daughter was 8, my son was 12.
Oh, wow.
Not exactly the best times to move your kids out of the only house they ever knew, the only school they ever attended, the only friends that they ever had, and move them to this foreign land of DC. But it wasn't about me. I was actually thinking about them and what it would mean to their generation to see themselves on something that is normally reserved for men. So I did this kind of in a covert way. I didn't want a lot of folks to know about this. I didn't want to get political. I didn't want to get out into the media. I knew I was onto something. And I did a little bit more research. And in the United States, to redesign our paper currency, it's not the president ultimately who makes a decision by law. It's not Congress. It's actually one person, it's the Secretary of the Treasury.
I didn't know that.
No one knew that. So I knew that what I would need to do with my team is obviously to convince at that time Secretary Tim Geithner. So it was that process that really revealed my true passion, if you will, as what I call myself, an accidental feminist, accidental historian, accidental educator, whatever you want to call it. Who would have thought that at the ripe young age at that time of 43 years old that I would find my purpose?
I think there's something to the accidental nature because that makes it so much more organic and true to self rather than something imposed on top.
I think it's also a great message to anyone else who feels that they're still trying to figure out what this all means for them. that it's never too late.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would have known me before that period, I mean, I was managing director of investments for a $22 billion firm based in San Francisco. Not that I didn't think any of those components were important, like history, education, women, et cetera. It's just nothing that I would wear on my sleeve or something that was really directing me.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, did that overtake me. It really just overwhelmed me. Think about the purpose of currency, right? If you look around the world, in almost every country, there's usually a very important person on the front and some very symbolic monument, edifice, or milestone on the back. And so for a lot of countries, including our own, we use currency to really institutionalize our history. Who was important, who mattered, what we value, and how it's valued. So if you're missing 51% of the population, what does that say about you?
And I'm thinking biblically, the Esther quote that we love to pull out for such a time as this. And perhaps you were in that role at this really pivotal moment in American financial history for such a time as this.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I do believe in my own fate, if you will, but I do still have kind of my spiritual side. And you can't deny sometimes what may or may not be fate. In a very surreal way, I think certainly my mom's journey has demonstrated that. And, I will say she passed away a year ago. It was another big moment for me, and I was her primary caregiver. So when I moved back to California in 2018, when she turned 80, and my daughter was starting UC Davis at the time, so it kind of worked out perfectly to go back home. Those last 5 years that I spent with her were just incredible. And so when she passed away, you're not quite sure. It's different for everyone, right? You never know how you're going to feel until it happens. You never know how you're going to feel when they get sick until it happens. And so, those first 2 years of health that she had were absolutely amazing. And those last 3 years of sickness were very, very difficult, but just as amazing. But I would say in the last year or so, where she did pass away last June, I feel her. I actually feel her. I never thought I would say that, but I do. I feel her, not all the time, but there are times where I need her the most. She's there. She's definitely there.
Oh, thank you for sharing that with us. All right, I'm just taking a moment with that. It's really beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to pivot from personal to our nation, and thinking of our nation as a whole. We haven't had a whole lot to get excited about over the last few years, from a pandemic to a fractured society to wars around the world. We spend most of our time reflecting on what's going wrong. So this year at the Cathedral, we have an initiative called A Better Way, inviting the American people to see beyond partisan labels and political beliefs. And so I'm wondering, how can America 250 unite us as a nation and help to bring the American people together?
That's a very ambitious goal. Although, we, as a commission, we were established by legislation in 2016. I was appointed to the commission by Senator Schumer in 2018, and then appointed as chair by President Biden in 2022. And this has been a journey for all of us. But as a commission, we did decide to kind of focus on these 3 words of educate, engage, and unite. Again, none of those are easy. But when you look back in the 70s and what was going on at that time, right? It was post-Vietnam, it was post-Nixon, civil rights movement, et cetera, kind of working up to 1976 was also a very, very difficult time for our country. In fact, the first bicentennial commission that was set up was actually disbanded. So we knew there was history here, and very similar history, actually. And so for me to join this commission, again, I think of it as an honor. To be appointed as chair is nothing that I would have anticipated. But I embrace it. I'm all in 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, because I do think it is an important milestone for our country. And I do think, based on the support that we're receiving, based on the programming that we have unanimously approved as a commission, and based on what I think is happening in our reality of something to believe in, yes, I do think the timing could not be better. And I am probably the most hopeful person of anyone of what we are going to be able to accomplish, not just on July 4th, 2026, but more importantly, a journey that started really when we first launched into the public domain last July 4th, but a journey that's going to continue long past 2026. So if you think about this from kind of 2 perspectives, one is the historical nature of what we're doing, but the other is the reality of today, of what this means, of who we want to be as a country, right? And so those words more perfect always come into my mind. We will never be perfect, but we will always strive to be perfect. And that was the nature of how we were founded, right? And if you think about the historical nature of our governance, and technically we are commemorating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, right? So we got to make that very, very clear
Yes.
because obviously our country had indigenous communities for thousands of years, et cetera. So the governance piece is really an important milestone, right? So, the American Revolution did not end in 1776. So there was still this ongoing journey, right? And again, a lot of folks wouldn't realize that between the Declaration of Independence in 1776, 12 years later was the ratification of the Constitution. That's a significant amount of time to get to the Constitution. And then it was the next year after that where George Washington was appointed as president. So again, as a country, that evolution of being that democracy took time. And so this isn't a one and done. This is still an evolution because remember, we had our constitutional amendments and everything after that. And so we're still trying very hard as a country to evolve. And so I think what's happening now, in my opinion, is this is a journey that we as a country have never really taken to understand how we became a democracy, how that continued moving forward, and what that means today. So especially as you see, and our focus is on this next generation of leadership, that is really a big priority for us. Because if you think about, what I'll call millennials and post-millennials, basically anyone who was born in the mid-90s and later, their world and their view of the world is very different. And so they're a little bit more cynical, a little bit more distrusting of institutions, a little bit more pessimistic, perhaps, in terms about their future. And so to give them something to believe in, I'm not saying we're the end all be all, we're the solution to all of that, but I do think that larger conversation of who we are as a country and the journey that's going to continue even long past 2026 is very important for people to remember, because I don't think we've really done that before. I don't think we've really discussed our history in terms of a reconciliation. I don't think we've really discussed our history in terms of what it means in today's partisan world. And I don't think we've discussed what it means as a country on who we want to be 10 years from now, or even maybe 50 years from now. So these are important discussions that I hope we can inspire. Again, I'm not saying we're the solution, but I think it is the beginning of something very special.
Well, you said this is a spark of hope, and that this is something that can ignite in small ways and in lots of places. And if we have ignited this spark of hope in people all over the country, how will that grow? And I really believe it can.
Yeah, I'm going to take it one step further. We're getting beyond hope. It's awareness and action. Everything that we do, everything that we decide is always about building awareness. And what does that translate into doing something? So there's always an outcome to everything that we do. So I want to start, for example, when we launched in the public domain last July 4th in 2023, we launched with America's Invitation. So America's Invitation is a video portal where anyone could go onto our website, america250.org, and submit their ideas, memories, family recipe, whatever they want to submit. One of my favorite videos still to date, and we've captured thousands, is this family sitting around a piano composing a song about what America means to them. It's just very, very beautiful. But we launched in the great state of Wisconsin, nice purple state. We are bipartisan, all partisan, nonpartisan, however you want to think about us. So thankfully, no political ideology has made its way through any of our conversations. And we launched with Major League Baseball at the Milwaukee Brewers against Chicago Cubs game. So baseball, hot dogs, and apple pie, patriotism for all. And it was just a great way to really kind of count up for the 3-year period, right? Those 3 years until 2026, to let people know this is coming and submit your video, right? So everything we do, again, has the awareness and action component. Very, very important. September of 2022 was my first commission meeting as chair. And that's when we really laid out what we're going to be doing for the next 4 years and beyond. And we spent that first year kind of getting our house in order, if you will, understanding what it was going to take to get there, the teams, the infrastructure, the organization itself, and then launched into programming 1 year later. But I will say at that first commission meeting as chair, not only did I propose some of these concepts that are underway now in terms of programming, but I also made 2 very lofty pledges. One was that we have to establish official America 250 commissions in every state and territory. So 56 total. So the 50 states, DC, and the 5 occupied territories. Now, that's a very difficult and ambitious goal because to establish a state commission is either by legislation, by that state, or executive order by the governor. So that's very difficult to do. So that was one pledge. So here we are 2 years later. How many state and territory commissions do you think we've officially set up?
Oh, I want to be ambitious and say all of them, but I'm going to guess 40.
52.
Wow.
So we are very close to having all 56. In fact, the 4 outstanding, Alaska, Florida, Guam, and Northern Mariana Islands, all have executive orders on the governor's desk. So it could be any second now. We'll be at 56. So that is exciting.
That's
and
very
hard for
exciting.
people to believe that's where we're at.
Wow.
The second pledge that I made was we are a congressional commission, and we are going to create the largest bicameral, bipartisan congressional caucus on the Hill. Another very lofty goal
That
because
is.
for people who know how congressional caucuses work, these are issue-specific subcommittees of Congress. The average size is 20 to 40 members. They're very hard to set up, and they're very hard to sustain or grow. Not every member of Congress joins one. They have to be fail-safe, usually, in order for a member to join.
Sure.
So, for example, the Adoption Caucus, one of the largest ones, has 145 members. That's a very large one. What number do you think we're at today?
And I guess 175.
215.
Oh, wow.
Crazy. Crazy. We are this close, very, very close to being the largest congressional caucus on the Hill. In my mind, we're already there.
Mhm.
We're already there. We're just working
It'll
backwards
happen.
from that. We are actually going to get to 250 by the end of this year.
Okay.
That's the number to reach for, right? We're just about there. And what's really interesting about that is, it's growing leaps and bounds. And so we were averaging 1 new member a day. In August, we were at 192 members. Look at this number there. It says 96 Democrats, 96 Republicans. I couldn't have tried to do that.
That's amazing.
The fact that it's happening organically,
Yes.
that's the takeaway, right? The fact that it's all
Yes.
coming together in a way where the states are telling their stories, right? The states are taking ownership of their own history. And we as a congressional commission are getting the support that we need from Congress. That's a very big message for the American public. And that's why it's really important for us to remain kind of community-based, grassroots, sea to shining sea. This is not about DC.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just about Philadelphia or the 13 colonies. This has to be everyone's commemoration and celebration, which is why we wanted to focus also on the states. I mean, think about where we were in 1776. We are a nation of nations, right? So in 1776, Alaska was Russia. Hawaii was its own kingdom. California was Mexico and Spain. Texas at one point had 6 different flags flying over it. We doubled our footprint with the Louisiana Purchase with France. And interspersed through all of that are the indigenous enslaved experiences. So every state has their own history. The federal government cannot tell their story. So to have these state commissions kind of come in and want to be part of this, that's very, very important for people to feel like this is theirs. This is their own, right? So they can feel as local as possible. They can feel what I felt on July 4th, 1976. This is my commemoration and celebration. That's what we want people to feel.
So thinking locally, one of the other initiatives is America Gives, and the Cathedral has been named as a national resource partner with this initiative. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes. So America Gives was one of those initiatives that I proposed in my first commission meeting as chair, that September of 2022. And really what it harkens back to is who we are as a country, how we were founded, and what kind of country we want to be moving forward. And we're a country that was founded on values. We're a country that was founded on faith. We are a country that was founded on service. And so America Gives will be the largest service initiative this country has ever seen. We're really focused on the volunteer aspect of what it means to give back. And the reason why we are partnering with the National Cathedral as a national resource partner specifically on this project, among other projects, is because we know that volunteer hours are generated by faith-based communities in the 30% range. That's a huge number. I mean, look, my mom had her entire career at Catholic Charities, right? Another, big volunteer organization for a lot of folks. And, we know a lot of schools mandate that in order to graduate from high school, you have to have community service hours. So how do we think about this holistically? How do we think about this as a grassroots initiative, but really kind of us playing the role as this kind of aggregator, facilitator, convener. And that's where the National Cathedral comes in, right? You are an interfaith, interdenomination organization who was charged by Congress to literally serve that purpose. And so what better way to partner together than to think about giving back? And my goal with America Gives is that we will use calendar year 2026 to create a Guinness Book of World Records of most volunteer hours ever recorded by one country. It has never happened before. So why is that happening in 2026? Now, not only is that the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, what else is happening of global significance in 2026 in the U.S.?
The Olympics are 28, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
You're on the right track.
Is it a World Cup?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. I knew
I'm not
you'd get
a sports
it.
person.
No, you got it. I knew you'd get it. So yes, the World Cup is also happening at the same time. We're coordinating very closely. And in addition to that, as you mentioned, the LA Olympics in 2028, 2 years later.
Mhm.
So you're going to have these three historical milestones converging in the United States on this global platform in a very short amount of time.
And when we are working together for something bigger than ourselves, it only draws us together.
Absolutely. And that's the other beauty of this too, is because we are a federal entity, what I'm also trying to show, look, in my 10 years in DC and 8 years in the administration, I've learned a lot about the federal government. And there's a lot of pearls there. There's a lot of great examples of how government actually works and works really, really well. So for example, people wouldn't know this. The Combined Federal Campaign, which is an annual giving campaign led by the federal government where public servants can donate every year, is the world's largest employee giving program. Most people wouldn't know that.
Oh.
Another great example of service is, and people don't know this, the National Park Service alone generates over 10 million hours of volunteer service every year.
Had no idea.
People wouldn't know that, right? So again, these are great case studies of motivation for the rest of our country to know that people have been giving back all the time. And it's also a great way to highlight other service areas as well. So for example, in addition to public service, we want to highlight military service. There were people who dedicated their lives, who gave up their lives to the British rule to establish our own government here, right? And who risked their lives as traitors to the crown, who risked their lives, again, to establish democracy and the one that is leading the example for other countries. So that's something that we take very seriously. We are using the 2 federally recognized days of service to remind people to give back. And so the first federally recognized day of service in the calendar year is Martin Luther King Day. Can you name the second one?
I knew that one. I don't know the second
And
one.
most people don't. It's
Okay.
9/11.
I
It's
did not
9/11.
know
That's right. Most
that.
people don't know that. So look, I mean, 9/11, I think of that as our kind of our last frontline defense, if you will, as a country against that scale of terrorism. We will never forget that. And it's no secret that in 2026 is the 25-year anniversary of 9/11. So that's going to be front and center. So by using these 2 federally recognized days of service, we won't forget, right? We will remember that that is what's going to inspire us to give back even more so.
So this is a moment of coming of age for our nation. And as anyone who has raised teenagers knows, I have 2 in my house. While it is both beautiful and hopeful, it can also be a fraught time as we shed what no longer serves us and move into a new future. So we've talked a little bit about this, but what are your hopes and dreams for America?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on this next generation because I think it's an important demographic for all of us. And again, this is as much about the future as is the past. And I would say that one of our other first big initiatives that we launched as a pilot earlier this spring called America's Field Trip specifically focuses on the next generation. So I'll get to my words of hope in a second.
Okay.
But America's Field Trip is a national student competition for grades 3 through 12, asking the question, what does America mean to you? So by essay, by artwork, these kids could submit their answers. And here's the beauty of this program, another one that I proposed on my first day as chair. The award recipients get to choose from a series of backstage experiences, most of which have never been offered to the public via our federal agencies. So our federal agencies, many of them are also part of our commission as ex officio members. The National Park Service, part of the Department of the Interior, is part of our commission. And they really took the lead in identifying these amazing field trips, if you will, for these kids. And then, of course, we have other members of our commission who've just been amazing. The Smithsonian, the National Archives, Library of Congress just all came forward And I had a chance to participate in some of the field trips this summer. So we did this as a pilot program from March through April of this year. We received thousands of submissions. And by the way, just so people know, half the submissions came directly from schools, the other half from parents. So whether you're homeschooled or faith-based or however you want to think about it, we learned a lot about participation from students, right? So of those thousands of submissions, and then the 75 were selected, and those 75 got to choose from about a dozen experiences. So the two that I went on this summer with some of these kids included the New York field trip. Oh my goodness. So it wasn't just a tour of the Statue of Liberty. We took the National Park Service boat from Manhattan to Liberty Island. We got up to the Crown, which doesn't happen. We went to Ellis Island when no one else was there, got the private tour. Can you imagine walking those hallowed halls of Ellis Island as a kid, right? And knowing the millions of people who have come to pursue their own American dreams going through there, right?
Wow.
We spent lunch hosted by the CEO of BNY, Robin Vince. They gave us a tour of the markets room, the trading floor, the cybersecurity command center. We ended the day at the New York Federal Reserve, getting an overview of monetary policy and getting into deep storage into the vault. How crazy was that, right?
Wow.
So these kids, right, this once-in-a-lifetime experience, like one of them, this young girl came up to me and she said, I felt like I won the golden ticket, but this is better than Willy Wonka. Like, how magical is that, right? These kids will never forget it. They will never forget it. And then I also went on the tour of Fort Point. It was a candlelight tour of Fort Point at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge. Amazing. They did such a great job. So it was a win-win for everyone, right? It's a win-win for these kids and their families or chaperones. It was a win for our federal agencies to be able to highlight their own national treasures, right? And rediscover our country all over again. But more importantly, it inspired these kids to think about what it means to be given the gift of pursuing their own American dream, right? If you want to talk about hope, read those essays or go online and look at these artworks. I mean, it's amazing. Again, America250.org. But I mean, you will see that a lot of what we're doing is very physical. It's very interactive, and it's finding those moments of connection. Perhaps the moments of connection that we lost from the pandemic, perhaps those moments of connection that we just lost in general,
right,
with this next generation that is very much focused on social media and some of the other, dynamics that really don't get them to be as interactive physically as we'd like to see them. So I would say, if you want to know what the world is going to look like, talk to anyone born in the mid-90s or later and really understand what they're saying and think the way they think in a really kind of special way, right? So if you think about anyone who was raised with the internet, and it's the good, the bad, and the ugly of the internet, right? But in a really interesting way, it's no longer what they learn at home or what they learn in the classroom, right? It's an open world to them. Again, the good, the bad, the ugly. But they are so much smarter than previous generations at the same age, right? They are so much more inquisitive. They're so much more passionate. They're so much more, again, purpose-driven. And the challenge for us as parents is to be able to guide them, to be able to give them the wings that they need in a constructive way. Not necessarily hold them back, but show them the path forward, right? The guardrails, if you will. That includes, our culture. That includes our faith, however you want to describe it. That includes, again, something to believe in, right? And so we do feel that responsibility as a commission to focus on this next generation of leadership. So I would say to any next generation future leader, never give up. Keep finding that passion, keep finding that purpose, and try to find it in a very constructive way, right? In terms of doing your homework, doing your due diligence, understanding all sides. And I think they do understand that. I just think there's a lot of competing interests for their attention.
Right. Well, thinking about your story and how things unfolded by doing well in school and studying hard, it lays that groundwork for the opportunities to present themselves. Then you will be able to take advantage of them.
Absolutely. Taking strategic risks is a big part of that, right? And again, if my kids are any example, my goodness, I mean, they're very, very hardworking. They're doing extremely well. But more than anything, I'm proud of who they are as people. They're very kind. They're very generous. They are very loyal. And I admire them every day. I think the world of them. And I do think that is a product of my mom. I do think that is a product of
And you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. But no, I swear to God, they came out that way. They really did.
Well, I have two children just like that, and I'm in awe of them as well, and their love and their compassion that they show to those around them. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for your time today. This was an amazing conversation, and I just can't wait for everyone to hear it and to get to know you and to learn more about America 250
Thank you.
and all that we can do together as a country.
Thank you so much. Go to america250.org. You can start the next full school year of America's Field Trip. You can already get online.
I've got 2 kids.
Good.
One's an artist and one's a writer.
Excellent. Yeah, between now and April 16th.
Okay.
So submit. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jo.
Thank you. What a joy it was to sit down with Chairwoman Rosie Rios today and learn more about her work, especially with America 250. On our next episode, we welcome Cathedral Canon and former Secretary of the Navy John Dalton and Chief Impact Officer of the American Military Families Association, Raleigh Smith Duttweiler, about the role of faith with military members and their families. We hope you'll join us for that episode, and thank you for listening to Crossroads. And until next time, peace be with you. If the digital offerings of the Cathedral enrich your daily life, please consider becoming a supporter today by making a gift at cathedral.org/inspire.